I returned to India after 33 years in the US and found almost none of my friends. I am 78 years old. I crossed an ocean, flew for more than 16 hours, and returned to the place where I was born after 33 years away. I came looking for the people I had left behind. I found almost none of them. The neighbor who helped raise me alongside my mother, the childhood friend with whom I shared secrets, the faces I had preserved in memory as though time could not touch them. Most had already gone, not by tragedy, simply because life had continued while I was away, and life has an end for everyone. And my two older sisters, those I could not say goodbye to, they were gone while I was still waiting for the right moment to return, a right moment that never came. When I finally set foot on that land, with the smells and the heat I had spent 3 decades trying to remember, I understood that I was not coming home. I was returning to a museum of my own life, with everything in its place, but without the people who made sense of it all. What happened in the days that followed, I did not expect. I found things I had not come looking for. I lost illusions that needed to be lost. And I learned, at 78 years old, something that neither of the 2 lives I had lived had yet taught me. This is my story. There are smells one never forgets. There are sounds etched somewhere so deep inside us that no distance can erase them. And there are places that, no matter how much time passes, continue to exist within us as though they were a room we never truly closed. I thought I was prepared. I thought 33 years were enough to harden the heart. But when the plane began its descent, and I glimpsed through the small window that ochre-colored earth, that immense sky heavy with heat, something inside me split in two in a way I cannot quite explain. It was not sadness. It was not joy. It was both at the same time, mixed with a pain that has no name. I left India at 45. My husband had secured a work visa to the United States, an opportunity that seemed too large to refuse. I remember packing our bags with that nervous haste of someone who knows their life is changing, but does not yet understand the full size of that change. The children were young. The house we left behind was full of life, full of voices, full of my people. My mother wept at the farewell. My father went quiet, which was his way of crying. My older sisters embraced me tightly at the door, one on each side, as though they knew that hug would need to last a long time. I said I would return soon. I said it with the conviction of someone who believes the future is simple, that life obeys our plans. I did not return soon. The first years in the United States were difficult in a way only those who emigrate can truly understand. It is not only the language, it is not only the cold, which in those first winters felt like a personal cruelty from the sky. It is a specific loneliness made of small things, not recognizing the smells of the supermarket, not understanding the neighbor's jokes, not knowing how to behave in places that seem obvious to everyone else, but are foreign territory to you. I clung to my family the way one clings to a plank in the middle of the ocean. My husband, my children, that small nucleus of people I loved and who understood where I came from. We built a life, a real life, beautiful, full of achievements I would not trade for anything. My children grew up, went to university, married, gave me grandchildren who are the light of my eyes. I have a home that is mine, friends who know me by name, a routine that makes sense. But India remained there, inside me. In every dish I prepared trying to recreate my mother's flavors. In every time I looked at the sky and felt the clouds had the wrong shape. In every dream where I returned to the street where I grew up and everything was exactly as I had left it. The American citizenship took far longer than I expected. This is a detail that people who have never gone through it do not quite understand. For a long time, returning to India meant a real risk of not being able to return to the United States. The bureaucracy, the visas, the rules that change and the ones that do not. All of it created an invisible wall between me and the place where I was born. I could not simply buy a ticket and go. And so I kept postponing. I kept building reasons to stay. The children when they were small, then their schooling, then my husband's work, then a surgery of my own, then the pandemic that stopped the entire world. There was always a reason. And the reasons were real. They were legitimate. But deep down, I know there was also a fear I never quite named. The fear of going back and finding things different. the fear of discovering that the place I kept inside me had moved on without me. When I finally decided to make this trip, some months ago, my youngest daughter was worried. "Mother, you are 78 years old. It is too far. It is too exhausting." My oldest son said he would come with me. I said no. I needed to do this alone. Not truly alone because my husband came with me, of course, but alone in a way that only I would understand. I needed to look at that land with my own eyes, without anyone explaining to me what I should feel. The airport in Mumbai was no longer what I remembered. Of course it was not. 33 years had passed through it as well. Where there had once been a small, noisy terminal, there now stood an enormous modern structure full of illuminated signs and stores from brands I recognized from the United States. For a moment, I thought I had landed in the wrong place. But then the heat came in through the automatic door and embraced me the way only India's heat embraces, forcefully, with fragrance, with a humidity that clings to the skin and says, "You are here. You have returned." And I stopped in the middle of the flow of people, with my suitcase beside me, and let that wash through me. My husband looked at me, said nothing. He knows me. We spent the first night in a hotel in Mumbai. I did not sleep well. I lay with my eyes open, listening to the sounds of the city outside, that mixture of horns and voices and distant music so different from the organized silence of the American suburb where I live. It was too much noise. It was too much life. And at the same time, it was exactly the noise I had spent 3 decades trying to hear in memory. In the early morning, before the sun had truly warmed things, I went to the hotel room window and stood looking at the street below. A woman sold flowers from a makeshift stall. A man pushed a cart. 2 children ran past in school uniforms. The ordinary life of a common morning, which in that moment was anything but common to me. I thought of my sisters. I thought of them with a sharpness that startled me. Their faces, their voices, the way they laughed. And then I remembered they were no longer here, that I had arrived too late to hold them again. This is the part I still do not know how to tell properly, the part that makes me stop mid-sentence and need to breathe deeply before continuing. My 2 older sisters passed while I was away. One, some years ago. The other, more recently. I learned through video calls, through the broken voices of my brothers on the phone, through photos that arrived on my phone days late because of the time difference. I learned from a distance, in the cruelest way there is to learn, that someone you love has gone, without being able to be there, without being able to hold their hand. Without the final embrace, one always imagines there will be time to give. They did not let me say goodbye, or rather, I did not let myself, because the distance was not only geographic, it was a choice I had made at 45, without fully understanding what it would mean decades later. This trip began as a visit, but long before we reached the city where I grew up, I had already understood it was something else. It was a reckoning, with time, with choices, with the person I had been and the person I had become. 78 years carry a great deal. They carry joy and they carry loss. And sometimes the two are so alike that you can no longer tell one from the other. What I found on this return was not what I had expected, but it was exactly what I needed to find. There is a difference between remembering a place and returning to it. When one remembers, everything remains exactly as it was stored. The colors are the same, the people are in the same places. Time has not moved. Memory is generous in this way. It preserves what we love without asking anything in return. But when one truly returns, the place has not waited. It moved on. It aged, it changed, it lost some things and gained others. And you stand there in the middle of it, holding an image that no longer exists, trying to fit what you see with what you remembered. That was how I felt when the car turned the corner onto the street where I grew up. My husband had hired a car with a driver in Mumbai. It was the most sensible way to reach the inland city where I had spent my childhood and youth. It is hours on the road, and at 78, I no longer have the disposition of before for unplanned adventures. We set off early, while the sun was still low and the heat was still bearable. For most of the journey, I was silent, watching out the window. The landscape changed gradually, Mumbai's wide avenues giving way to narrower roads, to fields, to small towns that appeared and disappeared as the car moved forward. I recognized some things and did not recognize others. A strange sensation, like leafing through a book you read long ago and remembering some pages but not all. My husband tried to make conversation several times. I answered in monosyllables. He understood and stopped trying. Several decades of marriage teach these things. The city seemed larger than I remembered. Or perhaps I had made it smaller in memory, stored a simpler, more contained version of the place. The main streets had more movement, more buildings, more noise. There were shops I did not recognize, and advertisements for things that had not existed when I lived there. But there was also that specific smell, a mixture of spices and wet earth and cooking smoke, that no city in the world has quite the same way. That smell had not changed. That smell was waiting for me. When the car turned into the neighborhood where my old house was, my chest tightened in a different way, more concrete, more immediate. It was no longer the abstract longing, that beautiful ache one cultivates from a distance. Reality was arriving, with all its gentle brutality. The house was still there. That was the first thing I noticed, and it was a relief so great I had not expected to feel it. I had been afraid they might have demolished it, built something else in its place, erased even the physical structure of where I had grown up. But there it stood, a little older, painted a different shade, with a new gate at the front that had not been there before. Different and the same at once. I sat inside the car for a long time, just looking. When I lived there, that house was full. My parents, my older sisters, my 2 brothers, the dogs my father could not turn away when they appeared at the door, the neighbor on the right who was forever lending us spices and staying to talk longer than necessary, the family on the other side whose children were the same age as my brothers and spent their days coming and going as though the house were theirs as well. Now a different family lived there. A piece of clothing hanging from a window I did not recognize. A flower pot on the doorstep that was not in my memory. I did not get out of the car immediately. I needed time. It was my husband who reminded me that I had arranged to meet my brothers that day. He said it carefully, the way one does when not wanting to interrupt something important, but knowing one must. And I was grateful, because I had indeed forgotten. Or rather, I had become so fixed on that moment in front of the house that the world around me had ceased to exist for a few minutes. My 2 brothers, the 2 who are still here. I need to pause before writing about this. My older brother is 82 years old. My younger brother is 74. When I left India, one was 49 and the other 41. Men in the middle of life, with the energy and solidity that period carries. In my memory, they remained that way, upright, solid, with that way of existing that seems permanent. When I saw them, I had a shock. I tried to hide, but certainly did not hide well. Time had passed through them the way it passes through all of us, with weight, with marks. My older brother walks with difficulty now, needs a cane he clearly does not like using, but uses because he has no choice. My younger brother had grown thinner than I remembered, his hair completely white, his hands marked by a lifetime of work. But their eyes were the same. Those eyes I recognized immediately, and it was because of them that I wept. It was not a contained, discreet weeping, the kind one manages in public while trying to maintain composure. It was the crying that comes from very deep, that one cannot control because it does not ask permission. The moment my older brother embraced me, something inside me collapsed entirely. 33 years of distance, 2 sisters I could not embrace one last time. All the goodbyes I never gave, and all the hellos I delayed too long, everything came at once. He wept too. My younger brother's eyes went red, and he pretended he was fine, which is exactly what he has always done his entire life, and I smiled through the crying, because some things never change. We held each other for a time I cannot measure. We said nothing of importance in the first minutes. There was nothing to say that would have been enough. Sometimes an embrace is the only language that reaches what words cannot. We sat together later, in a room that smelled of incense and warm food my sister-in-law had prepared, and then began the conversation I had imagined so many times during the journey, but which in reality was completely different from what I had rehearsed. My older brother began to speak of our sisters. He told of the final days of each, with the serenity of someone who has processed the grief, but still carries it. I listened and tried to absorb it, tried to truly understand what had happened while I was on the other side of the world, living my American life while they were ending theirs here. I cannot describe exactly what I felt. Guilt is a word both too large and too small. It is not quite guilt, because the choices I made had real reasons behind them. But it is something similar, an awareness that time is linear and cruel and does not go back, and that some things, once lost, are lost forever. Then came the questions about the neighbors, about the childhood friends, about the people who had formed the fabric of my life before I left. And there began another pain, quieter but equally heavy. The neighbor who used to stay and talk longer than necessary had passed away more than 10 years ago. The family from the other side of the street had scattered, the children gone to other cities, the parents no longer there. My closest childhood friend, the one with whom I shared secrets under the mango tree at the back of the garden, had gone some years ago after a long illness. One by one, my brothers told me, and I received each name like a brick, feeling the weight accumulate. Most had gone. Not by tragedy, not by accident. For the simplest and most inevitable reason of all, age. Life that continues until it continues no more. 70 years old, 80 years old, a few reaching 90. People who when I left were in middle age, full of plans and presents, and whom time had been taking while I was not watching. That night, in the hotel where we were staying, I lay awake for a long time. My husband slept beside me with that calm breathing I have known for decades. And I lay there thinking of something my older brother had said at dinner, almost in passing, the way someone speaks when they do not realize they are saying something profound. Life does not wait for us to decide when we are ready to participate in it. He said it in reference to something else, but I took it for myself, 78 years old, and still learning. There is a curious thing that happens when one grows old and returns to a place from childhood. One does not return alone. One carries along every version of oneself one has ever been. The child who ran barefoot through those streets, the adolescent full of dreams not yet formed, the young woman who once packed her bags thinking it would only be for a short while. All of those people come along, and suddenly you are in two times at once, seeing the present with the eyes of the past, and the past with the eyes of someone who already knows how the story turns out, or rather, who already knows how the story has arrived here, because it has not ended yet. On the second day, I woke before the sun. It was not insomnia, not anxiety. It was that old awakening I had forgotten I had, the body that wakes with the light, even before it fully arrives, as though it knows by muscle memory that here the morning begins early and is worth not missing. I slipped out carefully so as not to wake my husband and went to the hotel's small veranda. The sky was still in that shade between deep blue and lilac that precedes dawn. The birds were already awake, making that collective noise that feels like an announcement. The day is coming, the day is coming, prepare yourselves. I stood there with a shawl around my shoulders against the pre-dawn cool and found myself thinking, how many mornings like this have I lived through without paying attention? How many times had that same sky been above me while I was too busy with the urgencies of the day to simply stop and look? Youth wastes its mornings. Old age gathers them one by one, like someone who has finally understood the value of what they have. That second day, my younger brother took me for a walk through the neighborhood. He knows every corner of those streets with the intimacy of someone who never left, who has crossed that same ground for decades, through every season, in every state of mind. Walking with him was like walking with a guide who is simultaneously part of the landscape he is guiding you through. We went slowly, because both of us needed to go slowly. He because of knees that are no longer what they were. I because I wanted to look at everything carefully, to record every detail as though photographing with my eyes. The bakery where my father bought bread every Sunday had become a mobile phone shop. The temple on the corner was still in the same place, but had acquired a new entrance, more elaborate, with colored tiles that had not been there before. The large tree in the middle of the square, the one we used to climb as children while the adults told us to come down, was even more imposing than in my memory, with a thick trunk and roots that had long since exceeded the limits of their bed and spread across the pavement. Some things change, others endure. The tree endured. I stopped in front of it for a long moment. My brother stood beside me without saying anything, which is a gift that only people who truly know us can give. Silence at the right time. I remembered a specific afternoon, with a clarity that surprised me. I must have been about 11 or 12. I had climbed that tree with my middle sister, the second oldest, and we stayed up there for a long while, hidden among the leaves, watching the world below as though we were invisible. She told me a secret that day. I will not repeat it here because it was her secret, and some secrets belong to people forever, even after they are gone. What I remember is the way she smiled after telling me, relieved, as though carrying it inside her had been too heavy for too long. I said I would never tell anyone, and I never did. And now, I am the only person in the world who still carries that secret, and I will carry it until the day I too am gone, and then it will disappear with me as though it had never existed. There is a specific loneliness in being the keeper of memories that have no one left to return to. In the afternoon, my older brother took me to visit the cemetery where our parents are buried, and where two of my sisters were brought after they passed. I will not describe this moment in much detail, not because it is difficult, though it is, but because some things belong to silence that become smaller when put into words. I will say only this. I stayed there for a long time. I spoke to each of them in the way one speaks to those who can no longer answer, but who somehow seem still to hear. I asked forgiveness for the absences. I gave thanks for everything that came before them. And for a moment, in that quiet place smelling of flowers and earth and incense, I felt something I cannot quite name, but which was the opposite of loneliness. Presence, perhaps. The sense that they were still there in some way, that love does not disappear simply because a person is gone. Or perhaps it was only me needing to believe that, and that is all right too. In the days that followed, I began exploring the city differently, less in pursuit of specific people, less trying to recover what I had lost, and more simply existing in that place with openness to what it still had to offer. And that was when India began returning to me things I had not known I had lost. The first was the language. In the United States, I speak English most of the time. I think in English, sometimes dream in English, process the world in English. My native language had been stored in a corner, used in calls with my brothers, in moments of nostalgia, in the prayers I learned as a child, and still say in the original language because in any other they do not sound right. But suddenly, I was in a place where everyone spoke that language, in the streets, in the market, in the conversations of strangers passing by me, and something in me began to loosen gradually, like a muscle that has been contracted for a long time and is finally given permission to relax. I found myself thinking in that language, dreaming in it again, making jokes in my head that only work in it, feeling that a part of me that had been dormant was slowly waking, stretching, looking around with still drowsy but already present eyes. The second thing was the food. I cook Indian food at home in the United States. I always have. I have my recipes, my spices brought from specialty shops, my memory of my mother's hands teaching me the right movements. But there is a difference I always knew existed and was now confirming in practice. Food made here, with the ingredients from here, in the heat of here, by the hands of people who learned on this soil, has a flavor I have never quite managed to reproduce. It is not nostalgia exactly. It is something more physical than that. It is the body recognizing something that is in its origin, something it was shaped toward before you ever had any choice in the matter. My sister-in-law cooked every day, and every day I stood at the kitchen doorway watching, asking questions, writing things in a small notebook I had brought in my bag. She laughed at my seriousness. I laughed along. And there was in those mornings in the kitchen a lightness I had not expected to find on this trip, a simple pleasure that balanced the weight of everything that was so difficult. The third thing was harder to name, and I only understood what it was after a few days. It was the rhythm. Life here has a different rhythm. Not necessarily slower, but different. There are more pauses. There are more moments in which people simply stop to exist, to drink a tea, to sit in the doorway and watch the street. Time does not seem so linear, so focused on production and result. It is more circular, more present, more willing to include the useless and the contemplative as legitimate parts of the day. In the United States, I was always productive, always organized, efficient, focused. Those qualities served me well for decades. But here, suddenly, I noticed how accustomed I had become to justifying my existence by what I did, and how much I had forgotten to simply be. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench while my younger brother talked with an acquaintance he had run into by chance, I sat for 40 minutes doing absolutely nothing. No phone, no book, no mental list of tasks, just sitting with the sun on my skin, watching people pass. And it was one of the richest moments of the entire trip. On the last evening before the next stage of the journey, we all had dinner together, my husband and I, my two brothers and their families. The table was full and noisy, with conversations overlapping and children running and that wonderful chaos that only large families produce. I looked at that scene and thought of the years I had spent away from it, not with regret, not exactly, but with the clear awareness that there had been a price, and that I had paid it without properly calculating how much it cost. My life in the United States is beautiful. My family there is my heart. I would give up none of it, but that table, that noise, those familiar faces with so many more years than I remembered, that was also my heart, and I had stayed away from it for too long. Both things could be true at the same time, and they were. There is a moment on a long journey when one realizes one is no longer arriving, nor yet departing. One is simply inside. Inside the place, inside the time, inside oneself, in a way that ordinary daily life does not allow. It is a rare, fragile state that lasts briefly and is only recognized when it is nearly over. I was in that state in the final days I spent in India, and it was precisely because of that everything hurt and everything healed at the same time. On the morning we went to visit the city where my family had moved when I was a teenager, I woke with that strange feeling of someone who knows the day will be important before it has even begun. The sky was overcast, which is unusual at that time of year, and there was a breeze that was not cold, but was different, softer than the days before. My older brother came to fetch us early. He was more energetic than on the previous days, with a vitality that was good to see. We spent a good while in the car talking about old things, stories that the two of us remembered in slightly different ways, that pleasant negotiation of shared memory where each person defends their own version with affection, but without rigidity. He remembered that our mother wore a blue apron in the kitchen. I remembered it as green. We spent about 10 minutes debating this and laughing, and in the end agreed that she had probably had both at different times, and that neither memory was wrong. Only incomplete. That is how the past works. No one has the whole version. We only have the pieces that fit inside us. We passed by places I had frequented as a teenager. The school I attended from age 13 to 17 still existed, with the same iron gate I remembered, now bearing a new sign and a visible renovation to the facade. I stood outside for a moment, looking at that gate, trying to recover the feeling of walking through it at 16, with a school bag on my back and a head full of things that felt urgent then and that I can barely recall now. What I do remember is a literature teacher who had a way of reading aloud that made words seem alive, who leaned slightly forward when explaining something she considered important, as though wanting to be certain the message would arrive, who once told me, after I handed in an essay, that I had the gift of putting into words what other people felt but did not know how to name. I never told her how much that sentence changed something in me. I never went back to thank her, and now it was too late for both of us. There are so many expressions of gratitude one keeps for a day that never comes. That afternoon, something happened that I had not expected, and which became perhaps the most significant moment of the entire trip. We were passing through a street I vaguely recognized, a street near where one of my childhood friends had lived, the friend who had already passed, as my brothers had told me. But for some reason, I asked the driver to stop. I got out of the car without quite knowing what I was looking for. My friend's house had been renovated and was unrecognizable from the outside. But the yard of the house next door had a mango tree I recognized, enormous, with that specific shape of branches that only very old trees have. That tree I had seen as a child. That tree was a witness. While I was standing there looking at it, a woman came out of the house next door. She was around 70, white hair pinned back, with the cautious smile of someone unsure what a stranger wants in front of her home. I asked whether she had known the family who had lived there. I said my friend's name. The woman looked at me for a second, and then the wariness left her face. She said she had known my friend, that the two of them had been neighbors for more than 40 years, that she had been a good, generous woman who was greatly missed. And then she asked my name. When I told her, she put her hand over her mouth. She said my friend had spoken of me until her final years, that she had kept a photograph of the two of us from when we were young, a photograph I had not known existed, that she sometimes said she had a friend in America who would return one day. I was speechless for a moment that seemed very long. The woman invited me inside. I accepted without hesitating, which is not my usual way, because I tend to weigh things before deciding. But in that moment, there was nothing to weigh. There was only that open door and something on the other side that I needed to find. She brought me tea. She searched through an old trunk while I sat in a room that smelled of mothballs and dried flowers and stored time. When she returned, she held in her hands a small photograph, faded at the edges, with that yellowed tone of old photos. Two girls of about 12 sitting under a tree, laughing at something the camera did not capture, but which was clearly very funny. One of them I did not immediately recognize, because it was me, and we never recognize ourselves straight away when we were young. The other was my friend, with that smile that suddenly returned whole to my memory, as though it had never left. I looked at that photograph for a time I cannot measure. The woman sat quietly beside me, with the discretion of someone who understands what is happening without needing it explained. When I finally managed to speak, I only said thank you. There is no single word that holds everything I wanted to say, and perhaps in no language does one exist. She said I could keep the photograph, said she thought it belonged with me now. I left that house with the photograph carefully tucked in my bag, and with something in my chest that was no longer only loss. It was also presence. It was the confirmation that the people we love do not entirely disappear, that they leave traces in others, that they continue to exist in the stories they told, in the photographs they kept, in the names they repeated to neighbors who one day would meet the right person to receive what had been preserved. The final days were quieter. I went to the temple where my family used to pray when I was a child. I sat on the cool stone floor as I had done decades before and stayed in silence for a long while, asking for nothing specific, forming no words, simply present in that place that had witnessed generations of my family pass through. I went to the market with my sister-in-law and let her choose everything, just walking beside her and absorbing the noise and the colors and that organized chaos that Indian markets have, and that is impossible to explain to someone who has never been inside one. I spent an entire afternoon with my brothers, simply talking. No agenda, no destination, just talking. About our parents, about the sisters who had gone, about the memories each of us had preserved in different ways. We laughed a great deal, we cried a little more, and at the end, we sat together in silence, which is the kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other since before they knew each other, who carry the same origin in their bodies. On the eve of my departure, I went alone to the house where I grew up. This time, I got out of the car. I stood on the pavement for a moment, looking at the front of the house. The family who lives there now was inside. I could see the light on and hear the sounds of a television. A life happening in the same space where another life had happened before. I did not ask to go in. That was not the right moment for it, and perhaps it never would be. That house was no longer mine, and that was all right. It had fulfilled what it needed to fulfill for me. It had given me ground to stand on. It had given me a family. It had given me the beginning of everything. I placed my hand on the gate for a moment, and then I turned and walked away. On the plane back, with India receding through the windows, I found myself thinking about what my brother had said, about life not waiting for us to decide when we are ready to participate. I thought also of something I had not said to anyone during the entire trip, something I only understood in those last days. I had returned looking for the past, looking for the people, the places, the version of myself that had been left behind when I departed at 45. I found none of that, or rather, I found the traces, the memories, the stories preserved in the people who had stayed and in the photographs kept in the trunks of kind neighbors. But the past itself was not there. The past is never where we go looking for it. It lives inside, always inside, and it does not need a journey to be reached. What India returned to me was not the past. It was something else. It was clarity. The clarity that my life has two roots, and both are real and both are mine. That I do not need to choose between the woman born on that soil and the woman who built a family on another. That both exist in me at once, without canceling each other, without contradicting each other. The clarity that longing is not a problem to be solved. It is a form of love that has nowhere to go, and so it keeps circling inside us forever. And that is not a flaw. It is proof that something was worth it. The clarity that 78 years are not the end of anything. They are the place from which one sees better, where the view is wider, where small details lose their importance, and what remains does so because it is what truly matters. And the clarity that I have no regrets about anything. Not about the time I spent away, not about the choices I made, not about the life I built on the other side of the world. But neither do I regret having returned, having faced those streets, those cemeteries, those embraces with old brothers, and that photograph kept in a neighbor's home. When the plane landed in the United States, and I saw through the window that landscape that is also mine by now, I felt something I recognized, that same feeling of arrival I had felt in India, only different. The smell of the place where my children and grandchildren are, where the other half of my life is, where breakfast waits in the same cup as always, and my favorite chair remains in the same corner of the room. Home. They are both home. And to carry two homes inside oneself is heavy at times, confusing at times, a form of richness that costs dearly and that I would not trade for anything. I keep the photograph on my bedside table now. Two girls under a tree, laughing at something only they knew. Every morning when I wake, I look at it for a moment, and I remember who I was, who I am, and that the story is not over yet.